Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Eric Westman here. And as you know, if you've been watching my channel and you're part of the Adapt Your Life Academy, I, from time to time, have the great pleasure to interview the movers and shakers in the keto, low-carb nutrition world. And it's my great pleasure to be talking to Dom D'Agostino. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's right. Perfect.
Whom I met some years ago, a basic scientist, and you're going to love this video because Dom is at a position of seeing an emerging science and then being part of meeting planning and going to meetings that puts him in a unique position to be able to kind of see the future, crystal ball almost. So, thanks so much for speaking today, Dom. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me, Eric. And thank you for everything that you've contributed to the field. I think maybe your listeners know, but I'm sure there's other listeners that, you were just like an icon in the field. It was like I started in 2008 and, Dr. Atkins, of course, but Steve Finney and Jeff Bolick, I kind of lump you in with these people that were doing it way before I stepped in and didn't really formally do, funded research on ketones until maybe 2009 or 10. But you were at this for a long time before I ever came into this field. So before I even know what ketones were.
I'm passing a baton along, if you really step back, the clinical doctors had a method that they never published papers on. And so I was able to formalize some of the research and actually use a method at a university that has persisted, that is simple and corrects a lot of the internet stuff. In fact, I want to ask you about, should people be measuring ketones? Because it gets a lot of people off track in my view. But before we get to that, tell me, is this someone didn't know who you were? Who are you? Were you trained? What you're doing these days? And how you got into the keto world, please.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was always interested in nutrition going back in 1990, 1991. I think I was keeping rough nutrition journals as a high school student, mostly to gain weight for football. And also I started lifting weights. I was a skinny kid, needed to gain a little bit of weight for football. Broke my leg playing football, so that during that time off, I invested a lot of time and effort to learn about nutrition and weightlifting, and then decided in my senior year in high school that I was going to major in nutrition at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I majored in nutrition science for the first year, and then about a year into nutrition, I realized that, where is nutrition going to take me? Like, what can I do with nutrition? And I didn't see, I saw a couple paths, but I figured it would probably be good to double major in biology too, because I wanted to be a doctor at the time, either a physician's assistant or a medical doctor. And so I double majored nutrition. As an undergrad, I didn't know anything about ketones, ketogenic diets. All I knew is that, ketosis was a dangerous state to avoid.
Was it mid-90s? Are we in mid-90s now?
Yes. Yep. So 1994, 95. And it was actually really interesting because during the time I was majoring in nutrition, Dateline NBC came on, and Jim Abrams was on Dateline NBC talking about the ketogenic diet. And the only thing I knew about the ketogenic diet, it was a radical diet for bodybuilders to lose fat. And also I had two cousins that, claimed that the Atkins diet, was the only thing that worked for them, but they were like our weird cousins who adopted this strange diet. But I remember seeing the Dateline NBC with Jim Abrams, and that got me interested, but not that interested. I thought it was very curious. Yeah.
It was fringe, right? Childhood.
Yeah.
Or limited. Yeah.
It was fringe, and I wasn't so much into neuroscience at the time where it implanted. I wasn't curious enough to understand, or to even seek to understand, how a ketogenic diet can change brain energy metabolism, or the neuropharmacology of the brain. I was just too into other things. I was into nutrition for, fitness mostly. That's kind of probably why I majored into it. But I think my junior year in college, I was mentored under the dean of research at Rutgers University, Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, and she had a pretty big influence on really mentoring me to go the basic science route. So my undergraduate work then became my PhD dissertation, which was the neural control of autonomic regulation. So specifically the brainstem mechanisms that control respiration and understanding the oxygen sensing mechanisms in that. So that then became my PhD dissertation, and then after my PhD, I was in a program that was a postdoctoral fellowship program that was funded by the Office of Navy Research to look at oxygen toxicity seizures. Yeah, so I was double majoring in nutrition and biology and started working in a lab my junior year under the Dean of Research at Rutgers University, specifically studying oxygen chemosensitivity in the brainstem and how our brain controls our physiology, specifically cardiorespiratory physiology. So I majored in physiology and in neuroscience for my PhD. And during that process, at looking at different postdoctoral fellowship opportunities, I had one lined up at Dartmouth College, which was very enticing. But then I got recruited to Wright State University near Ohio State University. I think it maybe started as a satellite campus of Ohio State. On a military-related project, because I was also very much into scuba diving, and that was to understand fundamentally what caused central nervous system oxygen toxicity. So these are seizures that limit Navy SEAL divers using closed-circuit rebreathers, and then oxygen toxicity also limits the application of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which has 14 different FDA-approved applications. Of course, like carbon monoxide poisoning, decompression sickness, wound healing is a big one. So I developed various technologies like hyperbaric microscopes and patch clamp electrophysiology and radiotelemetry, and all these things are capable of being done inside a hyperbaric chamber, and that could literally allow us to look at the mitochondria under graded levels of oxygen and pressure that would simulate extreme environments, everything from the undersea environment to the space environment. And I was in a pharmacology program and physiology, and I was mostly interested in anti-epileptic drugs. And they had an effect, but the thing that worked better than anything else, just fast forwarding now, about 4 years of research, was putting in ketones, sodium beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate into my experimental preparation, was blocking the free radicals. It was blocking the seizure activity. When we moved it to animal models, we developed a ketone ester. Taking a little bit of a step back, the military did not like the ketogenic diet at the time because it was high fat, and it was, you're familiar with the reasons why, but they actually asked me to come up with a ketogenic diet in a drug. So we tested a number of molecules that didn't work, and then we found one ketone ester that worked remarkably well, and we kept studying that, and then we studied different formulations. So my introduction into the world of ketosis was mostly from the seizure community. So that would be Jong Ro. He pushed me into this field more or less and said it would be a fruitful direction to go into. Eric Kossoff, the late John Freeman, Mackenzie Cervenka, the Hopkins team, Adam Hartman. So they were, and then I ended up going to like American Epilepsy Society, where they had the special interest group in ketogenic therapies. And so that was my introduction into ketogenic diets, was from its accepted clinical application in drug-resistant epilepsy, where I viewed the ketogenic diet as a prescription diet. There's like low carb, and then there's prescription strength low carb, which would be a very calculated measured and quantified ketogenic diet. And then we asked the question. Then I connected with Dr. Richard Veach at the NIH and Dr. Mary Newport, who was giving her husband coconut oil, and then that would convert to ketones. So I was interested in the diet, and then people were put into my sphere. The late Dr. George Cahill, Sammy Hashem, Theodore Van Italy. I mean, these were like icons in the field of for me, that pushed me into this direction. So the fundamental question that I had was, could you induce therapeutic ketosis by elevating the ketones? And would those ketones have anti-seizure effects? Would it preserve brain energy metabolism in the face of excitotoxic insult? So that could be, or could it be used to metabolically manage seizure disorders or neurometabolic disorders? So I was interested in glucose transporter deficiency syndrome and a whole range of different disorders that we could talk about. And that kind of launched my career, developing a ketone ester, testing it, and then it worked better than anything that we had seen before. And then in 2010, I stumbled upon Dr. Thomas Seyfried's work in cancer. And then I had some people come into my sphere that implemented this, and it worked for them. So that kind of really got me motivated. And then I had a PhD student, Dr. Angela Poff, not doctor at that time, whose father had a brain tumor, and she was highly motivated to study cancer. But I told Angela, I was like, I'm not a cancer biologist. I'm just learning this stuff. But she was motivated enough to kind of more or less spearhead a number of projects in my lab that resulted in about a half dozen publications to show that therapeutic ketosis combined with hyperbaric oxygen, or even by itself, and then other metabolic drugs like DCA and metformin. I had other students study, targeting energy metabolism. So then, so it was like studying, actually another project was Alzheimer's disease that Dr. Mary Newport started at the Bird Alzheimer's Center. So I had a PhD student with Alzheimer's mouse models. They're not the best, but we saw some interesting results. So within 1 year, we had very encouraging data on seizures, on cancer, and on Alzheimer's disease. And I remember that year was very exciting for me. I couldn't sleep. It was just hard to sleep. I was just so excited, and it's been a fun ride ever since.
One of the questions I'm sure my listeners are thinking, does this apply to me? So, and with your understanding now of giving people ketones, administering it while they're eating carbs, right? I mean, apparently these are people eating an American diet or whatever else, not doing a keto diet. What is the difference between the metabolic state of someone drinking ketones while eating carbs, or actually generating, their fat burning, their nutritional ketosis, and they have a ketone level while they're not eating carbs? And it was actually kind of shocking to me that Dr. Newport could put coconut oil on her husband's cornflakes, and she didn't really know anything about the keto diet. So I'm eyes wide open about, could you administer ketones and get some benefit without changing the whole diet? What's your take on that with through the years now?
Yeah, I was firmly of the opinion that your body needed to physiologically change its metabolism from a glucose-based metabolism, not to completely fat and ketone metabolism, but that was a transitional period. And then that led me to look into, the military was pushing me into coming up with a ketogenic diet and a drug. So I was able to get into databases where a DARPA database, and I found out that there was research that was being done by the late Dr. Richard Veach, who I admire. He was a bit of a mentor to me, and also Dr. Karen Clark from Oxford. Later that year, I went to Oxford and I gave a talk to her lab, and, that kind of stimulated more discussions there. So this idea that you could acutely drink ketones and then it would have some kind of therapeutic effect was it was only compelling to me because where it was coming from. It was coming from Dr. Richard Veach, who was mentored by Hans Krebs, who was, mentored by, Otto Warburg. And, there was a long line of very, genius level knowledge, wisdom, and expertise on metabolism. And I read his review articles dating back, 2001, with Dr. Cahill and Britton Chance. I think like these physiologists were icons to me. So I got very curious, and I was like, I need to test this. And the first thing that we tested, we knew that if you fasted animals for a rat for 24, 36 hours, that it had a remarkable anti-seizure effect. That was pretty much better than any anti-seizure drug. So, and we knew, fasting. And then there was some studies with diets too, and anti-seizure effects. So the idea then was to acutely induce ketosis in 15 to 30 minutes and subject animals to 5 atmospheres of oxygen, which reliably produces a tonic-clonic seizure. And when we did that with a beta-hydroxybutyrate monoester, it didn't work. But when we tested another molecule that elevated acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate in a sort of a redox ratio and balanced the 2 ketones, then it worked. It actually worked so well. I remember an hour. The rats usually seize within about 5 minutes. And we're all standing around the chamber to the little window watching the rat after an hour. And it's like grooming itself. Like it's nothing. And we had never seen anything like that before.
Of course, I did it again to make sure it wasn't just a mistake.
Yeah, because occasionally, well, I've heard about super rats, like the military.
Oh, yeah, could be a special rat.
I was like, okay, maybe this is a super rat. So the next one we did, and the next one we did, it was like 5 in a row. And it was like, wow, this is really, really interesting.
But I'm hearing, at least for brain response, protection of seizure, the type of ketone that you administer matters. So not all ketones that you drink or eat or however you administer them would have the same effect, which I've been calling out for research on the administration of ketones. And I don't even know what the latest is on the company that sells that, the Prove It company, but just give me some research on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to stay away from the companies as much as possible, even though some of them have, our patents and things like that. I literally don't even return emails or talk to them. And I will vaguely, I'll reference some things that are based upon ketones that we tested in the lab. So there's certain molecules that we tested in the lab.
By now, there might be cases or recurring signals of people drinking those products that, I had blankety blank problem and it was fixed by it. Do you have any signal? Often these come in the comment section after a YouTube video, but if there are enough of them, I can't ignore those kinds of things. Although I need to formalize all that stuff. Does the administration of ketones seem to be a signal that is helping clinically?
Yeah, I get dozens of emails every day, to be honest. But I also think that I'm a little bit biased. So people will tell me what they think I want to hear. And then they also ask for advice. So I'm doing so typically it's, most people are doing low carb, are doing a ketogenic diet, and then they add ketones, for example. And, I think there's no replacement for a good diet. So that's the most important thing, like a well-formulated low-carb diet, ketogenic diet, or well-formulated any kind of diet, Yeah,
but, humans, we have a wide range of humans.
Yeah.
I remember in the smoking cessation world, which I was in for a decade.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Inventor of the nicotine patch, the studies that showed you could administer vitamin C to protect a smoker from lung cancer kind of graded why don't you just get them to quit, So I don't know, there may be a role for someone who can't get off sugar. They're totally addicted to, of course you want to get them off the crappy diet, as you said, but if there's a addiction and you can add something to prevent or help, or I'm not, that in the clinical world, this is what happens, while it might not be ideal.
Yeah, like you don't go to an alcoholic and say, okay, yeah, you could have alcohol, but just like 1 or 2 drinks, and then just try to stay sober. That's not, I am like consider myself a super disciplined person, but there was points in my life where I felt that food was controlling me. It usually happened when I was like in a caloric deficit, and your brain just kind of goes, especially if you're eating carbohydrates, you become fixated on food. And that's coming from someone who really, I don't know, I had no problems with carbohydrates really growing up as eating pasta from an Italian family and all that. But I realized that as soon as I cut that out, it wasn't a weight problem for me, but my eczema went away. My thought processes were clear. I entered ketone nutrition when I entered a tenure track position at the university, which required very long hours, not teaching full-time, writing grants full-time, doing research. And I had just like boundless energy. Once my body entered ketosis, it was just like this smooth energy. I was able to.
Well, so we've shared dinner a few times. And at what point? So it was at the tenure track needing to work. It is kind of a workaholics diet.
Yeah,
you just think about food.
Yeah. As is like intermittent fasting, and maybe I took that a little bit too far, because over the course of 10 years of doing it, I ended up losing, quite a bit of like muscle. Not that, luckily I had like some weight to lose, like even muscle to lose. So now I maintain a healthy weight, I think, and I maintain, physical parameters that I want to prioritize and everything. But what is really remarkable for me, what people kind of know me for, is ketogenic diet research, but also the development and application of exogenous ketone supplementation, including MCT. So I do think that the foundation of any health, optimization would involve the diet. Of course, there are situations where people are unable or unwilling to follow. So for example, I mean, I just, got off of a call with Mount Sinai. They're managing MADD, multiple acyl-CoA deficiency syndrome, where it's a fatty acid oxidation disorder. The DL, beta-hydroxybutyrate, is incredibly therapeutic and can reverse cardiomyopathy, like just giving ketones, but they cannot even tolerate MCT or any kind of fat. So they're on relatively moderate protein, very high carb, and then they use ketone supplementation like 4 times per day, really high doses of a ketone salt, sodium ketone salt. So, we tend to work with disorders that we know are highly responsive to ketogenic therapies. And then out of that came, cancer research. And we're studying things like Angelman syndrome, Kabuki syndrome, Pompe syndrome, like all these things I never thought I would go into. But, and I was steered into different research paths because the parents of kids would reach out to me with these disorders. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But, glucose transporter, for the general population here, I get lots of parents that have kids with ADHD, and they're getting their kids, once they improve their nutrition and get sugar out of the mix, they're getting them off medication. They're sending me pictures of their report cards going from like C/D student to like AB student. Many of them are also giving exogenous ketones too. And I think that's helping, especially if it's like a drink that tastes kind of good. Maybe it's, as with addiction, complete, restriction. If you can replace instead of restrict something, that's like, you have allulose, right? So we do research on allulose, actually in cancer research, because it can block or occupy the GLUT5 transporter. So if you formulate a diet that's high protein, high to moderate fat, has fiber, allulose, and then you also use MCT. So fiber, protein, fiber, MCT, allulose, all these things that I just mentioned here can comprise a diet, and none of those things that I just mentioned are going to turn into fat. Like protein is not going to turn into fat, like excess protein. Fiber is not, and I'm not too particular about the fiber, but I think it can be beneficial. Allulose tastes sweet like sugar. It will not turn into, and MCT oil is quickly oxidized and essentially does not get turned into.
Oh, so, please explain MCT.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what it stands for, what it does.
Yeah. MCT, I think of medium chain triglyceride, also sold as MCT, as like a poor man's ketone ester. Literally, you can buy MCT oil from CVS or Walgreens or Amazon for, I don't know, 15, 20 bucks for a whole liter of it. And that's a lot of calories, right? So MCT oil is derived from coconut oil or palm kernel oil. I try to choose ones that come from coconut oil just from a sustainability point of view. It doesn't have any taste at all. It's comprised of triglycerides that are 8 to 10 carbons. So that would be caprylic triglyceride or capric, or also known octanoic acid or decanoic acid. So these medium chain triglyceride oil, when you consume it, it goes very quickly to the liver via what's called the hepatic portal circulation. And then the liver dramatically increases the oxidation of these fats. And then that stimulates ketogenesis. So a large portion, relatively large portion of MCT, it will depend upon the physiological state. If you take it with a stimulant like caffeine, if you're fasted, you convert more MCT to ketones. However,
that was bulletproof coffee, right? Or
butter,
coconut oil or MCT or
But you can also stick it into your oatmeal and have MCT, and it contributes to small amounts of ketones and also reduces the glycemic response too. So this is a type of fat that is not packaged into chylomicrons like long chain fatty acids and entering the lymphatic system. It goes quickly to the liver. It's burned. It gets into circulation. Some of it converts to ketones. Also, what's interesting about medium chain triglycerides is that unlike long chain fats, they cross the blood-brain barrier. So they can get into the brain and into the mitochondria where they're used as an energy source. I didn't even know that until we were feeding MCTs. Well, we were mixing the ketone ester with MCT, and we were mixing ketone salts with MCT because it always made the exogenous ketones work much better. Because when you deliver it that way, it's stimulating your own endogenous ketone production while you're also delivering exogenous ketone. So in our case, that always worked better. And it was actually, it was actually more than additive. It was synergistic. So actually, that's one of the patents that we have, because I didn't expect it, and we looked at the data, and then we did a human pilot trial and was like, oh, okay, we see why, because the ketones stay elevated above and beyond. It kind of shifts the pharmacokinetic curve to the right, if you will. So when you give exogenous ketones and you mix it with the oil, then it sustains ketosis for like 6 to 8 hours instead of like 2 or 4 hours. So that was one of the observations. So MCT are great. You can make salad dressing out of MCT. You can incorporate it you can put it on your vegetables. You can, make coffee out of it, whatever. Some people do not tolerate MCT, but and MCT
nausea, right?
Yeah. And what I would say to that is like start with a teaspoon and then work up. I was kind of similar like that, at least on an empty stomach. But if I combined MCT with long chain fats or protein, then I could tolerate quite a bit. And at one point I was experimenting with MCTs and got up to 60 to 100 milliliters per day. And that was enough to basically elevate my ketones a good 1 to 2 millimolar throughout the day. And that represents a significant amount of energy in the blood, that level of ketones that can, be used by the brain as a source of energy. We've also seen that level of ketones has anti-inflammatory effect. It reduces reactive oxygen species in every model system we looked at. And now my student is studying the metabolic control of epigenetic regulation, where the ketone body, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and maybe acetoacetate too, they alter gene expression in ways that are beneficial, like upregulating antioxidant genes, improving, genes associated with neuroprotection and resilience. Never thought I'd go down that path, but we are.
That's independent of the diet.
That is correct. Yep, that is independent of the diet.
Could you do better? So now, very practical question. The people I've been teaching Keto Made Simple, I'm like, don't measure, don't check your ketones, don't drink ketones, just change the food. You'll be great. You'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Is there, in your experience, a role for adding ketones or MCT or coconut oil or anything that might enhance the ketone level beyond the diet itself. And I mean, you know, not just, well, it could just be theoretical. I mean, I think theoretically you could add on something to a nutritional ketosis kind of diet and get added benefit. I mean, that's what we're trying to look for. But I don't see that as anyone really testing that yet. And what's your opinion? Should we be testing, advocating all of these things?
Yeah, all great questions. Well, the preclinical work would suggest that exogenous ketones are highly efficacious. The human randomized controlled trials, everybody's interested in like athletic performance. That's like the one thing I don't, well, I study a little bit. Yeah. Athletic performance, but we look at performance in the context of like an extreme environment, like on top of Mount Everest or underneath the water. And in those cases, brain energy, performance, reaction time, decision making, all those things like improve. And actually, your general mental state improves in ketosis. There is absolutely no, replacement for. I don't think you can undo a bad diet. So, but a lot of people, kind of have their diets on point. And a lot of people do not want to follow, like my wife, for example. My wife does not want to follow a low-carb ketogenic diet. That said, we went to a meeting in Switzerland and she met Anthony Chaffee. And then after I've been telling about low-carb and keto for such a long time, then she decides to do a carnivore diet. And then after talking, because she does have vitiligo, and then Joe Rogan had mentioned that it like cured his vitiligo. So she has this like skin autoimmune disorder that's vitiligo. So she did the carnivore diet. So this is someone that did not want to do a ketogenic or low carb diet. And so this is something that may not happen with ketone supplementation, right? Because she was using ketone supplementation already, but, and that she believed in ketone supplementation. Yeah.
Carnivore, is she in ketosis? Does she measure?
Yeah, she measured. She usually stays about 0.6 to 0.8, and then she'll boost it with ketones.
But carnivore is a subset of a low-carb keto diet.
Yes.
I guess the irony, I should just reiterate, let me go back, unpack that a little bit. She said, no, I won't do this keto thing, but I'll do carnivore, which is a keto thing, right? So
that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Is her vitiligo better? Do you mind ask her? I've met her, and I don't know how private she is about that.
Yeah, I don't think she'd mind mentioning it. She was trying some creams, but it's more these things like they're like steroids, and they were working a little bit, but they get into circulation, so she didn't want to use them, and then the vitiligo came back, I think, even more. So she's convinced that following the carnivore now, a side effect that she did not believe would happen, that she lost, she didn't need to lose weight, but she went down 10 to 12 pounds, and she's literally full all the time. And she's told me, she's like, this is unbelievable. I have so much more energy.
Taking the shot.
Yeah.
Or a pill, or it's amazing.
And I was telling her this for years, but only... I think Anthony Chaffee is very articulate, and he also went through a lot of cases and said, hey, I had someone with vitiligo. And then she was like, okay, I want to try
it. Well, there's a saying, the cobbler's children wear no shoes. So of course the person who studies ketones, the family, the husband, I mean, and my kids eat carbs. I mean, anyway. So back to the question of ketones. So, but when you're saying ketosis helps in Everest and deep sea, is that someone who's in nutritional ketosis and you add ketones to it? That's what I'm really trying to get at. So
good question.
If I'm watching this and I'm in ketosis and I'm not measuring it and all that, would I get added benefit, or is it at that point where you just have to try it?
You get benefits above and beyond a well-formulated low-carb or non-ketogenic diet with exogenous ketones. So exogenous ketones tend to have little or no effect in a healthy person in regards to exercise, unless that person is in an extreme environment, or there is some type of pathology that impairs insulin sensitivity or glucose metabolism. So that could be the insulin-resistant person. So sometimes they respond really well to that. And And I think it's really important to mention that the studies that look at ketones, they give an acute dose and then they make them exercise to exhaustion, and they think it's kind of like going to work. That's like almost like, you give a steroid, you give an injection of steroid and put someone in the gym and expect their bench press to go up. So I don't think of exogenous ketones as like caffeine or amphetamine or something like that may acutely increase. I think of it more like a steroid, which would be a training aid, so that it enhances your adaptation to, for example, resistance training over time. So it creates an environment where you get a favorable adaptation to a training stimulus over time, like in recovery. So now there's studies, over 100 clinical trials on clinicaltrials.gov, just on like ketone supplementation. So this is being studied, and I think, publications may start to come out in 2-3 years, something. We have a couple in the pipeline.
Switching gears to the meetings, because this is where you get to see the publicate. Well, these days, sometimes the paper comes out before there's a meeting presentation. In the old days, the lag time you would get a read of what's happening at meetings. So how did the Metabolic Health Summit come about, and how did you become kind of the point person for this amazing meeting?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. Well, Metabolic Health Summit started as Metabolic Therapeutic Conference, and I think in 2010, I believe, I got a little internal grant from the University of South Florida to hold a small neuroscience meeting from like this neuroscience collaborative thing, and I think that was 2009 or 10. Then we had Eric Kossoff come, and I think we had some of the leaders in the epilepsy world. Then it was like, wow, that was fun. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this again? But there was no money available. So, the people that I choose to work in the lab have to be personally motivated. So they have to have like a limbic level of motivation, something that drives them above and beyond just intellectual curiosity. So I just happen to have a group of very eager students that was able to sort of like do a lot of the logistics to put together and communicate with leaders in the field. Jeff Bullock, and you've been at many meetings too. And I think the first one, it didn't really happen until 2015, I think. So we took a couple years, gap years, but then I was going to American Epilepsy Society and made some contacts through there. And then it was funded by the Epigenetics Foundation, which was like a spin-off foundation from Quest Nutrition. And the guys at Quest Nutrition were very generous to kind of give us a donation that helped us secure the venue and actually get honorariums for modest honorariums for speakers and things like that. And I remember the first room that we had, I think the capacity was 200, but midway through, somehow the word got out where all the seats were filled, and there was a bunch of people standing in the back of the room, and there was a bunch of people trying to get in the door. And we were like, whoa, okay. So then the next year, 2016, I believe, then we opened up the whole ballroom. So it went from 200 to 600 without even advertising at all. We had no advertisement. Like, we didn't advertise on social media or anything. And then it jumped from that. Then we had to move it to California. I think it was Long Beach. We did for 2 or 3 years, and then it was in Santa Barbara. More recently, it was in Clearwater, and it was really driven by just the pure interest and curiosity from the low carb community. But we make Metabolic Health Summit is a combination of basic science research, because that's what I am, clinical research, and then we have patients come and tell their experience. And then we also have people like you and who have the clinical experience, but also the motto is science to application, right? So we have, the most important thing is to have practitioners there that can speak to how to implement this, because that has been sort of the gap and the bottleneck, if you will. But also, one thing that we've done, I think that is helpful, is that we feel like this needs to be monetized. We need to, meaning that there are companies that are developing food products, that are developing apps, that are developing wearable technologies. Like, Abbott Abbott Nutrition, Abbott, they were going to be a big sponsor with their continuous ketone monitor for our last meeting, but they had to pull out because it wasn't yet FDA approved. Although last week I saw it got approved. So we like to really reach out to innovative companies that have something to offer to the community, and we bring them in to showcase what they have. And I think that helps with supporting their sponsorship, helps support like the venue and the speaker fees and things like that. Like I don't take any salary or anything. So in the last meeting, we're actually in a bit of a rut, and we're trying to, pay off the debt for that. But these meetings don't make any money, but they're great networking.
For the people who are watching who don't know this level of science and meeting, how much does a meeting like this cost now to put on?
Well, luckily for me, I am like part of the promotion, but so the business end is run by Dr. Angela Poff and Victoria Field, and she's got a great personality. She was a TV news reporter. So they, when they negotiate with the hotel, they write up a budget to basically figure out how much we could pay the speakers, how much. And in California, we were able to have like 80 sponsors, but in Florida, it was capped because of the size of the room to 40. So we ended up, having to owe money, or she does. So I come in to promote it, but it doesn't. I would 500,000. I would say.
Yeah, it's $500,000. Yeah. So
all said and done.
The idea that you can do this on your own in a GoFundMe, or that, I mean, as past president of the Obesity Medicine Association, I sat in meetings where we were, these venues, and it's not cheap. So anyway, that's why we are someone charges to go. There's a fee, and although the internet ability, this last one I Zoomed most of it, I just couldn't go, which is fantastic too. Mm-hmm. But so I just have to shout out again that Metabolic Health Summit brings together scientists who worked on the epilepsy treatment and clinical world there, and the diabetes reversal, Virta Health being the shining company on the hill that is, of course, difficult to do, and apps and all this. But anyway, it's been great to see that. But anyway, thanks for that. And I also know that it's a heck of a lot of work to pull off meetings, and have staff do that is so important. I'm glad you have that. So, wrapping up.
I'd like to mention real quick though. So one way, so getting staff, that's a big part, but I integrate this into, I teach undergrad, master's, PhD, and medical students. So I get my medical students to then become volunteers for the Metabolic Health Summit. And that gives them exposure to this because they can walk in and see the talks and they're completely blown away because they've never heard anything like this. So we do have a mandatory nutrition course at the university, but my role, I see is increasingly needed is to bring, to sort of indoctrinate, if you want to use that word, early first and second year medical students so they can go and incorporate this into their practice. So the Metabolic Health Summit becomes this entity that I suck up, that I suck the medical students into as volunteers, and then they can put that on their, their CV or whatever, but it gives them exposure to this. And it completely, there were like, we had like a dozen or more, and it just blew their minds. So to give them exposure to this, and that's probably one of the most fun things about Metabolic Health Summit.
Do you have bandwidth to take on more trainees? And if someone is interested in research on ketones and all, do I send them your way?
I think so. Right now, I have my hands full with first, second, third, and fourth year medical students, and some that have left into residency. We're still writing papers, but I do my best. And, I do, my bandwidth is kind of limited, but if I can't do it directly mentor them, then there are groups of people that work under me that can mentor them on different projects, depending on what their interest is.
Fantastic. So, one of my dreams, if I had all the time and money of the world, would be to put on a conference at Duke. We are known for nutrition and weight loss programs for going back 100 years. The rice diet started here, but it would be only for doctors. So it'd be a CME level, very practical, but deep dive into the science. And it'll be a smaller sort of meeting, and might be a little pricey. So I know the Metabolic Health Summit is more inclusive of wanting basic science and trainees and all that. But would you come speak at a conference at Duke if I could swing that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have 2 clinical trials at Duke, with oxygen toxicity. Dr. Richard Moon, Claude Pianadosi, Bruce Derrick. I don't know if you know that group, but yeah, we're doing ketogenic diet research there. I would love to come. I love Duke. Duke is an amazing, probably one of my favorite universities. Just walking around campus is just
love beautiful geography, but very data driven. I mean I think looking back, the only way I could have maintained maybe at University of South Florida, but maintain an academic home is in a data driven place. But I think also the history of weight loss programs, and that's what started me transitioning. But that's just fantastic. And well, how about to those who are watching, should they be measuring their ketone level, breath, blood, or urine, and which way, and how could it help their life if they're already in this world?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, the level of ketones are inversely proportional to glucose and insulin, right? So as you reduce carbohydrates and reduce total calories and protein, and really follow a restrictive ketogenic diet for weight loss and type 2 diabetes, you'll see your insulin go down, and in many cases, ketones will go up. Not always, but they generally tend to go up. So I think if someone is embarking on this journey to lose weight and to reverse type 2 diabetes, I think measuring ketones is a really important biomarker. Another important biomarker is just glucose over ketones in millimolar concentration. We call that the glucose ketone index. And the Keto Mojo device does that. We use it for metabolic management of cancer and also seizures and things like that. But I also think that single biomarker, if you take a person that has type 2 diabetes and obesity and get them in a GKI of not even like down to 1 or 2, which is maybe used for cancer, but get the GKI below 5 or between 4 and 5, that's going to have a profound effect on their metabolic physiology, their appetite regulation, insulin sensitivity is going to improve, and they're just going to lose weight. I have not, it would be almost impossible to imagine them not losing weight if they go from a standard diet and then achieve that GKI and maintain that. And that's totally doable with just a low-carb diet.
Have you seen a study published or presented at a meeting where they randomized people to no monitoring and monitoring, and if they both were strict to the diet, that there was any benefit beyond just the diet change?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that study yet.
No, I haven't. But the data that's trickling in from the current clinical trials, for example, doing ketogenic diet, even for like metabolic psychiatry, if they're taking a diet, is that the patients that are really invested in monitoring their biomarkers and checking their glucose, their metabolic awareness, for example, if they're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, gives them biofeedback, gives them behavioral feedback that would allow them to alter their next meal. So they're going to eat they're going to avoid that food, for example, or eat less of the food that spiked their glucose up if they're wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And this is for people eating a standard diet or a ketogenic diet, right? So the mere act of monitoring is, amplifies, sort of amplifies the person's ownership of their own diet. It gives them a sense of independence. And I think that's a big role. And you can't do that as a doctor. You can't be up on their labs every time, send me your glucose ketones. But if you just slap a CGM on them, tell them to go home and look at it once or twice a day, and they're like, oh, okay, so I ate this at 2:00. Okay, I'm not going to do that again.
And Mark Cucuzzella has published a few clinical papers doing that. Yeah. How about I didn't know the status of the continuous ketone monitored. Can someone order it now?
I'm in that program. Technically, I have an Android, but the software for the Lingo device does not work with the Android. So they're rewriting the software. So it's still, I think it's technically.
I just sent away. I sent away for the Lingo with the glucose.
Oh, the glucose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But what about the ketone one?
Yeah, that's still under development. And I've seen, Eric or Jeff Volek showed me his data. He was wearing one at the time. And I've had, about a half dozen people show me their data. I'm of the opinion that it's accurate enough for the everyday person. There's also the SciBio, I think some device out of China. And I've been in contact with numerous people that show me data on that and compare it to the Keto Mojo. So I think these things, they're up and coming technologies that have been up and coming for the last 5 years. And I think, I truly think in the next 5 years that they're going to be available and they're going to be, inexpensive enough to be able to use. So,
the people doing the diet themselves in orphan diseases, like all of those metabolic diseases you were talking about, McArdle, the MDD, the mainstream paradigm was that you had to give these people carbs, and it turned off fat burning, right? Turned off and so the medical influence you're having, Dom, is that the body runs well on fat. And ketones substitute where glucose is, and having even now heart failure studies finally being done. But the way the mainstream learned about it was through a drug that caused ketosis. So anyway, thank you so much. The meetings are fantastic, and your view of where things are going is one of a kind. Any last comment? How do people find you, or what would you the final word be?
Well, thank you for that. Well, I'm excited to be in this field, and I give a lot of thanks to you and many of the pioneers that kind of really were spearheading this field to begin with. If people want to find me, ketonutrition.org. That's keto nutrition, all one word, .org. Google Metabolic Health Summit, and you'll find, past speakers and their talks. And there's a Metabolic Health Summit YouTube page with, I believe, pretty much many of the talks are on there. There's also the Metabolic Health Initiative, which is an ACCME accredited medical education platform that you can get your CMEs from there. And then we have additional content. For example, I think Dr. Kyle Gillette did like a hormone 101, GLP drugs and things like that. So there's like additional content if you're a practitioner wanting CME credits that are deep dives into specific topics.
Fantastic. Thank you for hanging in there. Times were not always so exciting. And I look forward to seeing you again, Dom.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.